All righty. Good morning, everybody. We are going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to Building Youth Power Through Mentoring a Conversation. This is our keynote for the day, and I'm really excited and ready to hear this great conversation that we're going to have about mentoring. And we've already had such a great start to this 2021 Mentoring Summit here in Connecticut. So I am really looking forward to all of the great things that we're going to be doing during our time together. So today I'm going to be your moderator for this important discussion. My name is Ariseed Hill. I'm the mentoring program manager at the Governors Prevention Partnership. Some of the things that I am involved with is I convene the mentoring collaboratives around the state of Connecticut. Those are practitioners and mentoring programs, youth development programs that meet either once a month or on a quarterly basis to talk about strategies around mentoring and also sharing resources. And I'm all things training and technical assistance to mentoring programs in the state of Connecticut. And I take that role very seriously. And I love supporting the mentoring programs here in Connecticut. So today we are in for a treat, and we have two great pioneers and I dare say legends in the mentoring community nationally as well, to have them with us today. And so we're going to go ahead and I'm going to just talk a little bit about Steve Vassor, who's a proud father, husband, and a mentor and a man of faith, and is currently leads cfurther, a company where he's writing and launching membership communities. While VP of Campaign for Male Black Achievement, Steve quadrupled the membership and amplified the power of its activities and key events. Prior to CBMA, he built a track record serving and leading nonprofit and municipal organizations with annual budgets ranging from $400,000 to $18 million. Through his work with United Way of Greater Philadelphia and Southern New Jersey, funded nonprofits and supported youth development strategies. At Mentor, the National Mentoring Partnership, he supported and developed 28 mentoring partnerships across 22 states and built a system to onboard new coalitions. So we're so happy to have Steve with us today. And Steve, if you just have a couple of minutes, something to say before I introduce Brian.
I'm just grateful to be with everyone. And thank you at the Governor's Prevention Partnership for hosting this important conversation and bringing little old me along to join you in the work. Thank you.
Thank you. And to bring up for our featured speakers, we have Brian Sales, who is the owner of Transformative Training and Technical Assistance, LLC, located in Northern Virginia. He's been working with youth, mentoring and youth development space for about 30 years. He's a national subject matter, practice-based youth mentoring expert, and a sought-after trainer and speaker. I can attest to that because I've benefited from both Steve and Brian's expertise in learning training myself. Brian has conducted hundreds of trainings and technical assistance visits for a variety in national, local organizations in 46 states across the country, including Puerto Rico. So he gets around. Brian has a bachelor's degree in history with honors from Hobart and William Smith Colleges and a master's degree in Africana Studies from Cornell University. And Brian, if you'd just like to say a couple words before I talk about our featured other co-host.
Thank you very much, Aristide, and good morning to everyone here in the state of Connecticut and my good brother and friend, Steve Vassor. It's an honor to be here with you all today. We're looking forward to the conversation. Won't do a lot of talking today, but really bringing the village together to share their expertise. Our idea about this panel discussion comes from the community, as the folks in the community who are doing the work on a daily basis know your state best. So we're looking forward to it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Brian. And also today we have Faith Harris Villegas, Executive Director from Bridgeport Public Education Fund. It's always a pleasure to work with her as she leads the Bridgeport Mentoring Collaborative. We also have Corinda Richardson, Youth Development Manager at the Urban League of Greater Hartford. Always a pleasure to interface with her as well, as she represents the Greater Hartford Mentor Collaborative. And Randy McCrae, social justice consultant, Community Foundation of Eastern Connecticut, and she's out in the eastern part of the state. Glad to have her on with us today. And Ellie Cafillo, mentoring coordinator for Clayburgh Family Centers. It's good to see you, Ellie. It's been a while, and I'm glad to have you on part of this great conversation that we're going to have today. And without that, I'm just going to get out of the way and let our presenters go ahead and take over.
Fantastic. So, good morning, everyone. And we just want to start off with setting some ground here that, as you know already, we're living through unprecedented times. We're going to talk about, just essentially where we've been through 2020 and what that means. And there are three calamities that hit us all at the same time. That is the pandemic, the racial events of the past summer, and the economic downturn. So hopefully we're going to have a lively dialogue on how mentoring can build youth power, culturally specific resources for young people that help those young people that we care about to affect system change. We want to build the leaders of tomorrow, and this conversation hopefully will begin to help think through where we are and what's possible. Next slide, please. So let me just set a little bit of groundwork. You'll notice in this image you have the dollar bill or a monetary note in the U.S. with a face mask on it and quarantine stamped on it. And if we said nothing else, that would probably characterize what COVID has done to the U.S. economy and certainly the global economy. And I'd like to go to the next slide and hold for a second. Because what I want to point out to you through a timeline, a recitation of some very quick facts is this context that our young people are living through. So you'll remember when we all said happy 2020, we truly were happy that it was 2020. And somewhere around the 20th day of 2020, everybody began to demand a refund. January 20th, the U.S. confirmed its first report of COVID-19 on U.S. soil. By the end of January, the U.S. CDC, the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, declared a public health emergency. On February 6th, the U.S. confirmed the first COVID-19 fatality in Santa Clara, California. February 23rd, while out for a run in his neighborhood in Brunswick, Georgia, Ahmaud Arbery was chased down, run over by a vehicle, beaten, shot, and killed. And all of this was recorded on cell phone video. Keep that date in mind for a second. March 2nd, the COVID-19 pandemic was first detected in the state of Georgia, and the first death was reported on March 12th. March 11th, after confirming the virus had spread to 10 nations, the WHO, the World Health Organization, declared the viral outbreak of COVID-19 a global pandemic. On March 13th, 3 Louisville Metro police officers knocked on a door, broke down the door, and then fired over 20 bullets into Breonna Taylor's apartment, killing her. March 16th through 20, unemployment benefits filings begin, and they increase by some estimates at least 400% in the state of Connecticut alone. March 23rd, gatherings of over 10 people were banned, bars and nightclubs were ordered to close, and a shelter-in-place order was established. On March 25th, Amy Cooper, a white woman allowing her dog to roam unleashed in a part of Central Park where leashes are required, calls the police. She calls 911 on Christian Cooper, no relation, claiming that this black man is threatening her life. On May 25th, later that day, Minnesota police officers arrested George Floyd. 17 minutes after the first squad car arrives at the scene, Mr. Floyd was showing no signs of life. Within that 17 minutes, for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, a police officer puts his knee on George Floyd's neck. He dies on the scene. His murder was captured on a phone camera and shared across the globe via social media. By that Friday, May 29th, protests erupted in major cities across the nation, thus reinvigorating the Black Lives Matter movement. This would also be the first time that Breonna Taylor's name was invoked in public at a Louisville Black Lives Matter protest. Additionally, this is the first time that we see footage of Ahmaud Arbery's murder posted to social media. All of this at the end of May. June 12th, at a Wendy's in Atlanta, Georgia, outside, we should note, with no irony, at a Black Lives Matter protest or after one, Rayshard Brooks was killed after being shot in the back by an Atlanta police officer. By the end of December, the U.S. had lost 9.4 million jobs, and that's with a massive spike, and certainly as you average it out. Connecticut alone lost, by the end of December 2020, 289,000 jobs, and closed 2020 at 8% unemployment, which is double the year before. By the end of December in 2019, Connecticut had lost 4%, had a 4% unemployment rate. And to date in Connecticut, there are 271,000 cases of COVID in Connecticut. Nearly 7,500 people have perished to date. And those numbers are being driven specifically by deaths in Harford County and in Fairfield County in Connecticut. And so into this context, all of this happens over the course of a year. I said nothing about the fact that schools opened and closed, opened again, closed again. Some people got equipment, some people didn't. Who got it depending on who was in line when. It depended on who made the decisions when. It was all a mess, to put in short. And our young people somehow were supposed to persist through all of this and lead through all of this. One of the hardest hit industries in Connecticut, as I looked at the data, was behind so-called private sector jobs, was our work. 8,900 jobs in the professional sector, if you will, in sectors that aren't covered by construction or not covered by some of the other work areas. When you look at where our work resides, 8,900 jobs lost. Now, that doesn't mean that all of our professionals got up and walked away. What it means is that we certainly took a hit in our work, that our young people took a hit when and where they needed us the most. And again, are looking for us to help them think through and move through this moment and still imagine a future where they can be the leaders that we need, where they can be the doctors we'll be looking up at when we ourselves are needing help. And so this is the context we walk into in this moment. And into this, we also assert and insert the fact that young people have exercised a form of power that we haven't seen, and that we hope to help them learn how to channel down the road. And so with that, I'm going to stop and pass on to my dear brother Brian Sales, who will take us deeper into the data.
Thank you, Steve. Just some quick, Steve, that was just a tremendous opening. You really set the table, helped to sort of frame the conversation. You can go to the next slide. I wanted to just share some information from Mentor, the National Mentoring Partnership, about this sort of transitioning into your specific space around youth mentoring and youth development. Many of you, and you'll hear from our panelists, talk about how programs within your state and also around the country. So Mentor did a survey, I believe, at some point in the middle of 2020, to really capture what's happening with youth mentoring programs. And I invite all of you, I believe Aristide and Joe could also share on the Governor Prevention Partnership website this particular survey and study for you all. But the struggle to transition from face-to-face to virtual youth mentoring. Steve talked about some of the challenges that we have faced, we have all experienced, but that has been a tremendous challenge for youth mentoring programs. How do you, based on the very nature of youth mentoring, when it's really about the face-to-face interactions, it's that engagement, take something so specific, so unique to the organizational structure of mentoring and move to a virtual platform? Many of the young people are dealing with mental health stress, and we'll share a couple of the data points here in a moment. Parents unemployed, the disconnection from for young people with their peers, with school, and other sort of social supports have been happening. The intergenerational challenges and systemic racism that many are facing today. Steve spoke about the Black Lives Matter movement and also this sort of rise the last 4 years under the former leadership of the president at the time. Next slide. You can go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So operations, all of the programs, you can go right back. The operational challenges that programs are facing, and you'll hear from Ellie and Corinda and Randy and Faith talk about the adjustments that the nonprofit sector, the governmental sector have had to face in our panel discussion. You'll talk about how programs have essentially sort of withered away. What does that look like in terms of the recruitment process of volunteers when people are struggling just to make ends meet? How can we then connect with, as programs and with mentors, with our proteges, with our mentees, with those young people who we purport to help in a global pandemic? With all of what is happening in 2020, with this unseen killer COVID-19 virus, it has completely challenged the way in which nonprofits and young youth development programs working with young people are working together today. We're still trying to figure that out. And our hope is that we'll be able to get some information from some of our panelists today to share how things are working better in Connecticut. Next slide. So again, these challenges are also very basic, right? Young people struggling today, a lack of job security, housing issues, employment issues, the scarcity around food. We've seen food lines that we have not seen around the nation for the first time in many of our lives. Many of the programs do have volunteers that do want to help, but as their survey sort of pointed out, it's been very difficult to try and engage in this new virtual world, partly because of some of the privacy laws and programs' inability to connect with mentees, young people, even outside of the program, regardless of some of the technologies afforded us. Next slide. One of the things that is sort of grown is that we found in some of the information, some of the structured inequality that exists. 1 in 5 Black children, 1 in 5 Latino children. This is it may be outdated data from Kids Count compared to 1 in 100 white children live in concentrated poverty. Just mind-boggling, the amount of poverty. I've been to Connecticut several times, but again, you know, when we think about Connecticut, for those who are outside of Connecticut, we don't often associate this level of concentrated poverty. It's important for us to understand what we're looking at, and then how this sort of mitigates or transforms itself in this global pandemic. We look at the amount of young people who are disproportionately involved in the criminal justice system, and the numbers for young people of color, again, have risen. The disconnection, as we talked about earlier, as it relates to some of the outcomes that young people are associated with thriving, they are particularly vulnerable at this time, given the pandemic. Next slide. And as we sort of talk about mental health, I've never seen I've never seen the American society that we live in talk about mental health as much as I have in the last 6 to 10 months. Everyone is talking about it. Young people are depressed. Young people are anxious. Clearly, they're anxious because their parents are anxious. Their adult friends are anxious. And because of that, we're starting to see even more. I wasn't able to find very specific data, and hopefully some of our individuals here, either on the call today or our folks from the Governor's Prevention Partnership, may be able to get you some more information specific to Connecticut. But the major, the depression and the anxiety is on the rise. Next slide. Just again, sort of speaking to the issues of depression, there is an increase in suicidal ideation. LGBTQ youth, along with other groups, particularly Asian American, Asian Pacific Islander groups, are seeking out mental health resources more than ever before. And this is alarming to us, particularly with 11 to 17 years old. We're seeing this all across the country. Next slide. So we have a few resources. Again, the coronavirus resources from Mentor. You can find it at preventionworks.com. And also some of the other resources specific to other cultural groups as well. I think there's one more slide with the resources, and I believe this will be available for you all to download. Next slide. So NAMI is the National Alliance on Mental Illness. They do very specific work with various cultural groups, African American, Hispanic, Latinx, Asian American, and Native Indigenous. So these are some very culturally specific resources that you all should be able to use for your programs. So with that said, I appreciate being able to sort of talk a little bit about that right now. And I kind of want to get a chance to turn this back over to my good friend, Steve, if I'm following the, the script that we put together. I'm going to turn this back over to you. So thank you, sir.
No doubt about it. Thank you, Brian. And this is the part where we get to open up, and let's start with just getting some reaction from our panelists. Again, just want to reintroduce you all to Faith Villegas. We'll start with you, Faith, and then we will go right on down the line. Randy, you're up next. Get ready. Ellie, you're right after Randy. And then Corinda, I can't see you, but I know we will be able to hear you loud and clear. So just a quick reaction, Faith, to what you've heard thus far. And thank you.
Well, thank you. That's both you gentlemen did an awesome job of presenting some data that may be new to some of us, but also I think at this point it may put not necessarily the pressure, but an emphasis on not just recognizing the moment that we're living in, but also giving consideration to what resources and other needs we have moving forward. So thank you for providing that information. And I'm down here diligently jotting down information, particularly with respect to the unemployment and lost jobs, and particularly in our sector, because the needs are there. However, it just seems that we're going to have a much greater challenge moving forward, but seeing the group here today, I'm feeling a little bit more empowered and ready to get to work. So thank you.
I appreciate that. And Randy, thank you so much, Faith. And we're coming right back around to you. So don't go anywhere. Randy, I, tried hard to make sure that I didn't see you throw anything across the room through my statistical presentation, because this is your world. And so what say you to what we shared thus far?
So I think, can everyone hear me? So for me, of all of the things, how you set the context, they're all critically important. But one of the things that sits in my wheelhouse in terms of this work, I mean, I come in a history of working with young people, youth development work, and being a youth development practitioner, but now sit on the other side of the conversation and really in social justice and activism. And one of the things that comes to mind, and it's extensive conversations Aristide and I have had, is how do we ensure that people who are formally mentoring and informally mentoring young people have the tools to help them have these conversations and think critically about the world around them so that they can become agents of social change. And it's very important, practitioners in this field, for us to be culturally competent, understand the issues very clearly, and help guide them as they try to reconcile the influx of information they're receiving from social media. And then a lot of I think we underestimate the weight of these inequities in a very relational and emotional way. We happen to talk about them as data points and in a very practical way, but people are waking up in these conditions every day This is what they're seeing before they go to sleep, when they wake up in the morning, and living throughout the day, especially when they're not able to connect with people in person anymore, and they're just situated in their environments. I think we need to think more thoughtfully about that and how we support young people, but also cultivate a generation of young people who will change the world, right? They're not going to just be our doctors, our lawyers, and whatever have you. They're also going to be the people who continue this energy around social change, and we need them to do that. And so we want to make sure that individuals are equipped with the right type of skills to be able to support young people in that manner.
That's amazing. So you have asked a question, Randy, that I want you to bookmark, because we're going to boomerang it back to you later in the presentation. And that's really how are we supposed to really do this? So I can't wait till to hear your response to that very question. I know it's going to be on point. Thank you, Ellie. So hearing the context, what say you in this moment and in this space? How does this sit with you?
Yeah, so
And thank you.
I think, well, I just want to ask you a question, Steve. You said that many of us wanted a refund on 2020. I think we'll start to take one on 2021 too. I mean, I think we're heading in that direction as well, So I think that you, Steve, brought like so much power to and gave context to what our life looked like last year. And Brian, you really talked about what the programs looked like. I think that being on the program side and having to run through do the programs through this, we have changed. We have thought about what it looks like organizationally, and the structure of mentoring has changed. And I'm excited to dive deeper into that within our conversations. And Randy, to your point about waking up every day to what the world looks like, I think so many of us thought maybe it was going to change, and we had band-aids for our programs and all these things, and yet we're in it every day, and we're having to change the way we do things. So I think that's where I'm at right now.
Excellent. I appreciate that, Ellie, and we'll be back to you as well around in 30 seconds or less. How do we solve the world? So hold tight. We're coming back to you with that question. Corinda, good morning and welcome, and thank you. And please, what's your reaction to what you've heard thus far?
I think it's so important to set the stage for where we currently are, and taking the pulse and taking a minute to breathe and reassess what the needs truly are. The key to real mentoring is connection. And you can only connect when you really know what the issue is, how to address it, and then how to communicate and navigate through it. And trying to go through the status quo or just keeping generalizations of just start this bond, kids go through these things, stopping to really know what is happening, how is what's happening impacting the lives of our youth and the lives of our mentors, can help us to have a real conversation and real journey and solution to build for both. So thank you all for just setting the stage right, setting it with facts and foundational so we can know how to really address the work accurately.
Yes, because I will tell you, I'm done with hashtag alternative facts. And so before we jump into, yes, that's right. I said it. This is why I don't get invited places. So before we go much further, I want to ask the four of you a personal question that I think is important for our professional work. And that is, in just a couple of sentences, if you could, how have you managed to get from there to here? And I'll start with you, Corinda, because your voice is the one we got to worry about. We got to really be careful. So you first, and then we'll work.
I'm telling you, the name of the game for 2021 was creativity and innovation. And I've been saying, kind of like Beyonce, it was the lemonade making year. How many ways can you squeeze and work these lemons to get lemonade, but really staying in that mode and trying to go high as opposed to complaining and seeing what we're dealt with. How can we really make juice with what we're being dealt with? And that has given us some really unique perspectives, really unique opportunities to not only stay relevant, but try to creatively integrate the ideas of our village to address both us, the staff who are here, the mentors who kind of still want to give but are nervous, and the kids who really don't know how to place all of these emotions. So creativity, innovation, and lemonade, hashtag that for real.
Yeah, I got it. I got it. So those of us who are on social media right now, please let the world know that Corinda said lemonade, and she said creativity and innovation in 2020. Ellie, how have you gotten from there to here? Just a couple of quick thoughts there.
Yeah, so I think number one was the support of my colleagues and the network of people around me who are doing mentoring. I think that was what got me through this past year, knowing that we all had each other's back and we were going through the same thing. So definitely that was a huge piece of it.
Excellent. I appreciate that. Faith.
It would work if I unmute myself, right? I want to kind of follow the model here. I would say honesty and vulnerability if I had to choose two words. And when I think about the honesty, I had to be honest with myself and understand that I was at a loss and nearly everyone around me was at a loss. So trying to pretend as if I had it all together was not going to work. But that also fed into the vulnerability with respect to we don't know it all. We don't know, we can't forecast the future. However, being honest and vulnerable enough to state that to funders, to state that to our students, to our mentors, to our partners, I think really helped me and the staff to be able to launch and pivot in ways that were impactful. So,
thank you so
much.
And
I like lemonade.
and I like lemonade. That's right. Lemonade is a popular drink, and it still is. Randy.
I will say that given my role, which is really to bring the partnership together and identify ways that we can support them, it was just really trying to stick with it and maintain connection, even as people became distracted, focused on being immediately responsive to their staff and their mentees during the pandemic. Our role is to try to keep the momentum going and identify ways that we can support them. And so just holding spaces and platforms where people can have honest conversations about what are the struggles that they're having and how we can, as a community, support them. We've heard feedback when we had those meetings that was helpful just to understand what was happening for others, sharing some of those insights, sharing some of those best practices. And then just to reinforce what Faith, Corinda, and Ellie already shared, just looking at being creative and innovative and thinking outside the box. I think most of our mentor programs had one particular way that they do things. And this has now brought us to a place to explore and reimagine other ways of doing things, other ways of being together, other ways of maintaining connection, other ways of supporting youth. And so there is a silver lining in this, what's going to be now year 2 of this unfortunate situation. But I think we will come out better together on the other side as a result of being able to reimagine what we can do to stay connected.
I appreciate that. And part of the impetus for this question, before I pivot to Brian and have him, take us deeper, is as people who do this work, we tend to value selflessness. In some ways, I would call us great Catholics, in that we just constantly give and give and give and give, but don't restore ourselves. And so part of this was asking our panelists, in the midst of all of this, what were the tools in your own tool belt? As my father would tell me often, an empty bag cannot stand. And you certainly can't give from an empty cup. So how have you restored yourself, and how have you, put your own mask on, literally and figuratively, before going out and saving the rest of the world? So I appreciate your candid answers, and I'm certainly hoping that serves the rest of us who are listening, to remind us that, it's also about us, that we've got to make sure we're doing what we need to do, and put that under self-care, if you will. But that it is important. It is revolutionary, and we must demonstrate it to our young people. You got to take care of yourself, as well as take care of community. So with that, Brian.
Well, thank you all. I think those are some interesting and some compelling comments that we've heard. And sort of on that note, so as a kind of transition over to talking about how programs have changed. I mean, one of the things that has happened in this new world is working using virtual technology. Now, I'm someone who I guess has been fortunate enough in his work life to have been working both for a consulting company, and at Mentor working virtually. But there's this new term being used and has been used for the last basically about a year, Zoom fatigue. And it's just looking in a computer screen at you, all of you lovely people, right? Here. But at some point, many of us who crave the social interaction in a face-to-face environment are struggling. We're getting tired, our eyes are getting tired. Many of us go from meeting to meeting to meeting, and we just are dealing with what's called Zoom fatigue. And I know there's other platforms as well, but that is something that we're all experiencing. Talk to us a little bit about, and we can kind of go in order following the path that Steve has said. How are you experiencing that? How are programs dealing with that? And how have you been able to adjust in light of what we're dealing with here and with the reality that 2021 will be more of the same? So why don't we start, we'll go first with Faith.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Brian. One of the ways I would like to think that we've tried to overcome Zoom, because I don't think we've overcome Zoom fatigue. I would say we're probably getting right into the thick of it, particularly if you're dealing with school-age children and doing the work throughout the year. But I will say that we've been really taking our time and being diligent about looking at body language, surveying our students, ensuring that this is something that they want. Because again, we never want to kind of jam or force this on any of our students. We want this to be a relationship that's reciprocal. So I would say the first thing is really kind of checking the temperature. I think someone else indicated taking a pulse. So I think that's really, really critical in this work. But also, when we do have the opportunity to engage with our youth, when they're having down days, doing some of that checking in with the social emotional learning skill sets that we all may be trained in, rather it's the ruler program or other alternative programs, but being able to match body language and some of that verbal language, if you will, and being able to stop and say, you know what, today may not be that day. Do you think next week is a better week? So I would say the second piece is to offer opportunities and options for them. Because again, we have objectives, we know what we want to provide, we know how impactful it can be. However, we still have to have that starting point where we are understanding that this is about the student, it's student-centered, and we need to start following their lead. So I would say that that's one of the ways that we've tried to, or some of the ways, excuse me, we've tried to battle the Zoom fatigue and how that can have an adverse impact on your program if you're not monitoring and responding accordingly, if you will. So
I appreciate that. Thank you so much. I mean, the focal point around student-centeredness or youth voice is really important. And just sort of doing the temperature check, to use your language, and then looking at those opportunities and options for other ways in which you can communicate. Anyone else would like to share? I guess I can go to Randy first. I'm going to call on you, Ellie, last, because I want to transition to something that you said during our prep time. I think is really important. But Randy, go right ahead.
Yeah, as I mentioned before, we at the Community Foundation, we convene our mentoring collaborative, but during the pandemic, one of our mentoring groups was going through sort of a strategic planning session, and this came up, right? Maintaining student engagement over Zoom when they've been doing that all day in the class. So one of the things that we discussed, which I think has been working well for them, is being more creative with the use of Zoom, right?
Okay.
Every time we hear Zoom, we think of exactly what we're doing right now. And we just as a team reimagined what it would be like to do a challenge or a cooking class or some other things that would keep students engaged via Zoom that would be fun for them. So they reached out to their students just to say, what types of things would you like to do? And they really stepped out because they had a really rigid curriculum, right, that they did when they brought the students together in person around mentoring. But they just, we really talked about and reimagined what are the ways that you can still gain the benefits of a mentoring experience without that rigid curriculum, right? And once we start to have that conversation, we drew on the board members and other volunteers who can host, you know, cooking classes or craft classes or other types of challenges. They also just wanted to deliver care packages to re-engage some of the young men who had become disengaged, to say, hey, we know you're still out there, we're with you, come join us when you can. So I think those are some of the ways that we talked about how we can kind of counteract sort of that culture of Zoom just being like this, and really reimagining what being on a Zoom can be like. And so I think that that's one particular strategy that's worked well for them. And I can see that because we're going to be like this for some time now, that's what a lot of other groups are going to start to do.
Thank you so much. I think that's wonderful. The reimagining that takes place. And so much happens on the ground. I'm someone, although I work the national level, translating research to practice, there's just so many innovations that happen because people are creative. Programs are creative and imaginative. And their ability to connect with people in a multitude of ways, you know, certainly surpasses the ability of some of the researchers and the policymakers in terms of them being able to catch it, because they're always trying to measure things in a particular way. And sometimes you just can't do that. But that innovation, and I appreciate you sharing, and I'm hoping that the other participants on this call are capturing some of this information and can certainly reach out to you as well. My good friend Corinda, how are you hanging today? I know you have a little bit of issue with your voice, but you sound majestic and magnetic as always. So talk to us, share a little bit about, Brenda and I go back, you guys. I did some work with her a couple years ago, so I can talk to her like that. So.
All right. If you can't hear me, just do like this, and I'll try to project some more. So Zoom fatigue is so real. We've been trying to mix it up a little bit, like the ladies have been saying, and even using it for Kahoot games or different trivia. Nice. We've used it for watch parties. When Michelle Obama's Becoming came out on Netflix, and even yesterday with Kevin Hart's Guide to Black History. So using it so that they can still be entertained, even if they don't have an account, where we don't have to provide hands-on programming, but they can kind of just sit and be engaged. We've also used it to do hybrid types of events where we can only have a limited amount of people on site. We gave packets to mentors and mentees to take home with them so that we all can be engaged in different service learning projects and community service learning projects together while we were apart. And during the summer, since the kids were really, really strongly desiring social contact, we leveraged outdoor events. We took some of our programming to the parking lot. We took some of it to the sidewalk, and we had different fitness events. We had part of our end of year celebration we had outside and had some double dutch ropes. So we tried to integrate outdoor and indoor and still virtual without it being like a lectured instruction while we're still virtual.
Fantastic. I love hearing all these great ideas. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. My good friend Ellie, we talked a little bit earlier. You brought up some really good, important points, and you can certainly speak to the earlier question, but I want to also sort of transition to something that you said I think is very important. For those of you who see me here, I did work actually in the mentoring field and direct service, ran programs, and know the struggle of trying to train, trying to recruit mentors. Ellie brought up something really important. Talk to us a little bit, and again, feel free to answer the earlier question if you'd like to transition into that as well. But talk to us about how you have seen sort of the operational side, the training of mentors and having to do that virtually. What does that look like from your perspective?
Yeah, so I agree with the Zoom fatigue and kind of we've tried to stay creative and all that stuff. But something that Zoom has offered our mentors was the ability to do training right from their home. So which was convenient for them because our mentors are volunteer and their time is so limited. And as a program, we always kind of danced around that, right? So we'd have them come in, they'd be doing all these trainings in person. Was it after work? Was it a Saturday morning? So something that we had put into place was just these mini, like monthly opportunities. We called them little mini trainings that we'd meet at 6:30 for 45 minutes to an hour. We talk about boundaries, different, so we'd have a topic, right? It would be boundaries or family engagement or virtual mentoring. But really what it came down to was this place that the mentors came, they had support with each other, they did these things, and it was super convenient. And they popped in, like I said, after they had dinner and sat down at their computer and then left. And I thought that it was a really well use of time. And it just made such a world of difference in our training. We still, and the way that I run my program is, and I've always run this, that it was centered around what was convenient for the mentors and the families and so on and so forth. So in my trainings, it's still, okay, what's good for you guys? Is 7 o'clock good for you? And on a Thursday evening to do your orientation? Okay, no problem. I'm home, you're home, we do it over the computer. So really, it has afforded us that luxury of convenience, I think, when it came to the training piece of it. Even for our families and our youth,
Right.
It was convenient. Those times were convenient for them.
That's fantastic. I mean, for years we struggled to try and get a common time for volunteers to show up for your face-to-face training. Oh my God. I mean, I did them on Saturday mornings. I did it, during the week till 10 o'clock at night sometimes, and I could just feel the pain. So like this new virtual world just sort of opens up other possibilities. But we love the face-to-face engagement, right? But what Zoom has done is that it has shown programs that there is an alternative way or supplemental way in which we can engage people. And the fact that all of us, regardless of age at this point, are going to continue to work this way. And again, as I said, I kind of have been working like this on some level, but now that there'll probably be some sort of acceptance of some aspects of that. I do think that when the pandemic ends, we're going to have a rush of people wanting to be together, hang out together more and more. But I do think this alternative technology can be useful for certain. Thank you for sharing that as well. Steve, it looks like I got a few other items on the list here for us to kind of go over. I want to be cognizant of time, and Steve, please feel free to let us know because we've got a bunch of questions here. But just sort of looking at the juvenile justice system, that we sort of pivot from there. I'm not sure to what extent all of your programs work with young people that are impacted by the juvenile justice system, but I know that Governor's Partnership Prevention Program, i.e. the Connecticut Mentoring Partnership, has done a tremendous amount of work in this area. Can any of you sort of talk, if you can, and so feel free to volunteer here, talk about how your program addresses, as they call it, disproportionate minority or confinement of minority youth, so-called minority youth. Any of you all working in that space, particularly right now, feel free to. I think, Randy, you did some of this. Yeah, go right ahead.
I'm not working directly in that space, nor are we at the Community Foundation of Eastern Connecticut, but I will say that the Dalio Foundation has ramped up its efforts to really connect with disengaged youth. And we hosted a panel, I can't remember, Deb's on the call, she probably remembers the date, there's so much going on, but we hosted a panel on disengaged youth to really to be more intentional about connecting with that population. And through that conversation, we learned about the programs in Eastern Connecticut that were working with that population and begin to facilitate some more formal partnerships, develop strategies to really re-engage with that population. And the Dalio Foundation is interested in making strategic investments in certain communities across Connecticut with that specific target population. So I just wanted to kind of put that out there. I don't know if anyone from the Dalio Foundation is on today's session, but that is something that is gaining a lot of traction and energy, and that's their specific, they're not looking at any other areas, they're just really looking at that population. So I think we'll see more, they're bringing resources to that, and so I think we'll see more energy around that in the next couple of months.
Thank you very much, Randy. Corinna, go right ahead.
The pandemic has opened doors to seize opportunities to reach this population for us. We didn't engage in work during the pandemic. However, we were able to apply for and successfully receive funding so that we can address the reentry population more intensely over the next few years. So that is another benefit that's come through 2020 and through the pandemic, that they've noticed these populations that need more acute and intense care and reaching out to organizations to see what they can do to help be the village.
Thank you very much.
And
Hey,
if I
did you want to
could-
add something? Please go right ahead.
I did. Thank you so much. One of the other things I wanted to add to this respective target audience, if you will, and that's our juveniles that may be within the justice system. And I'm happy that we're actually having this conversation, because quite often they're not a population that's centered when we talk about youth and mentoring. So thank you for this platform. With the Ed Fund and some of the work that we're doing here in Bridgeport, we're trying to actually interface or engage with young people before they get into the criminal justice system. So trying to do some of the prevention work in the earlier stages, if you will, but I'm also working with some of our city appointed officials, but also other community organizations, where we have about 18 young people who is now called the Bridgeport Youth Panel for Change. And they are coming up with a community-wide project for the city of Bridgeport that will be youth-facing, to talk about some of the greatest challenges that the youth feel they have from their perspective. And I can just share briefly, one of the things that they talked about is the lack of jobs and the lack of after school or extracurricular activities if you are not an athlete. If we take a step back and we see that there was a lot of back and forth about athletes being able to be more engaged and be able to play. And when the CIAC finally gave their permissions, it was primarily for basketball, right? For the spring sports, if you will. So there's no cheerleading, there's no tennis, no any of that type of stuff. However, the young people that we're currently working with on this youth committee, they are seeking to try and address that. Rather, it is, can we get a skate park? Can we get a biking park? Can we, connect with some of our local galleries for those who have passions with the arts? So it's really, we're taking a step back and not working through a curriculum or anything like that. Our primary focus right now is sitting the youth down at the table and saying, hey, give us your ideas, and we're going to try to find the resources and people to make sure that your ideas come to fruition. So we're not just addressing the moment or a particular situation, but we're addressing the systemic changes that need to happen. So
Thank you very much for that. And sort of in line with that, I mean, we know that one of the offshoots, if you will, and sort of precedes the BLM movement, the Black Lives Matter movement, is this whole idea of defunding the police and law enforcement and moving sort of away from this sort of criminal justice mindset, this prison industrial complex that has sort of enveloped our nation for decades here, that's led to the mass incarceration disproportionately of Black and brown folks, and the increasing criminalization of young people as people of color, even in the preschool ages, right? So this whole transition that we think about, then how do we begin, or what's happening in Connecticut around defund the police? Not to get necessarily into sort of the controversial areas, but yesterday I sat on a webinar with Dr. Luke Wood out of San Diego State, and they were talking about disproportionality with Black students, Black male and Black female students. And what struck me in the state of California was that there were so many young people that had been getting suspended, kicked out of school in preschool. So that criminalization began then. What does that look like? Now, I've said a lot. I know I've said a lot, but when we think about this defunding of the police, what that really means for those who are thinking from the perspective that I'm speaking about is taking funding from the law enforcement perspective and then putting some of that money into prevention intervention program to support that idea. Now, that could be controversial for some folks, and has been controversial, but clearly in California, they just got an initiative passed, I believe in Southern California, to actually support some funding going that way. Are there similar approaches here in the state of Connecticut that you all can speak to our audience? Anyone can respond to that.
well,
Go right ahead.
I can't say that there's a system-wide approach, if you will, and or a local approach, but I've been in conversations with the Greater Bridgeport NAACP, and I've been connecting out to individuals out in Ohio. And one of the things that we're really, really excited about is that in one of our communities here in Connecticut, it's a neighboring community, Easton, Connecticut, Weston, and Reading. They are facilitating what's called freedom schools. And if you know the population in Reading, Weston, and Easton, it's very different from the community in Bridgeport. It's a predominantly white community. And to hear that they're fully embracing the community or the freedom schools model with the whole intent of really exercising their muscles in diversity, equity, and inclusion. But the real outcome of that is to really change narratives, right? So going back to what you talked about with respect to Black and brown children already being criminalized at 5 and 6 years old. Schools in certain states already diverting funding to making sure that that child has a prison bed by the time that they're 18. That, I believe, calls for all of us to really think about the narrative that's out there first and foremost, because if we don't address how we look, think, and feel about someone from a different race or socioeconomic background, then we are going to further perpetuate some of these systemic challenges that we've been trying to get addressed in the long term. So I'm really going to be drilling a lot deeper down into the freedom schools and how I can bring some of that work and how they're doing that in a community that looks very different from Bridgeport. But the work and the intent of what they're doing, I think, will be critical to moving not just Black and brown people forward, but all of us forward, because we're living in the United States of America, not for a respective group. You know, there's not an average or an addendum there. It's the United States of America. And I think the freedom schools and dealing with some of the narrative and the perceptions of how Black and brown people are viewed is going to be critical for moving forward.
Thank you so much. Randy, did you want to go right ahead?
Yeah, so I just wanted to say that there are a few organizations that I'm aware of that are in New Haven as well as Eastern Connecticut, which really mobilize and empower young people to serve as advocates and leaders in these types of conversations. And that's Hearing Youth Voices in New London. That is Black Lives Matter and the Citywide Youth Coalition in New Haven. They all have partnered on many initiatives to actually elevate this conversation and provide youth, young people, a vehicle for really to engage in leadership opportunities to affect them around change, which is part of why we're having this conversation today. Like, how can we all do that? And those organizations have, you know, active models in which that's how they mentor young people, right? They're still, even though they're not directly named a mentoring organization, but that's how they mentor young people through workshops and opportunities to cultivate agendas for change and exercise their activism. So I just wanted to make sure that I mentioned that those particular groups have been, during this pandemic, continually engaging young people, continually providing them opportunities to, in a way that works well for them, be a part of this conversation as we look at what has come out, the inequities that have come out of this pandemic that have been longstanding inequities, but also as we have now begun to have this conversation about what it means to defund the police. And the young people, you know, I always say this on social media, Black women will save us and young people will save us, you know, so that's still holding true. It's held true in many social justice movements over time. And so, you know, those groups have been continually engaging young people, keeping them safe, but also giving them an outlet for really negotiating what's happening in this moment for them as well.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. We're going to be very cognizant of our time and so forth. I think I'm going to take this another 5 minutes in the areas of Q&A, panelists. I know we have sort of a working script there, and then I'll turn it over to Steve, and we'll do some Q&A from his position, or his perspective, but also maybe engage the audience, and audience members can feel free to ask questions in the chat. So let's talk a little bit about what programs have done to deal with the mental health crisis of young people. I know we sort of touched on that somewhat, and perhaps others may have other thoughts as well that are audience members at all, can you share with us perhaps what you have been seeing with young people? Did it reflect some of what I described earlier with some of the very brief data points? Corinda, you and I have worked together a few years ago, and just curious to see what folks are doing or what you are doing programmatically around the area of mental health with young people at the National Urban League.
National Urban League has made social emotional learning a priority to encourage their affiliates to tap into their students and their needs, and providing training for us as well. Locally at our affiliate, we've taken a multi-tiered approach by number one, leveraging our interns in a different way. So some of our interns are social work interns. We are not encouraging them to counsel the kids, but we've intentionally set some mindfulness moments, some emotional wellness activities at the beginning of every session, and sometimes at the end of the sessions, to make sure that they can get grounded as they transition from their school to our after-school virtual programs. We don't use the same approach every time because students learn and engage differently. Some are visual learners, auditory, tactile, so we try to provide a variety of things, not saying that they have to adopt them, but they can be exposed to them so that they know when they're in a situation and don't know how to express or articulate themselves, here's a tool or a strategy that they can integrate, and how they can share it with someone else who they may not be able to identify what it is, but they can be able to help and say, stop, breathe, this is what we can do. We've also tried to integrate, like we said, some of the service learning projects as well, doing more artistic expression through painting, through coloring sheets, and also doing a communication workshop. There was one called like the drama triangle and a ladder of inference, and using some of our community partners who provide professional development, usually for corporate teams, but to whittle it down that would be teen appropriate. So they know they have this emotion, and this is what it means when you hear it. It's not a personal attack, and this is how you can deconstruct it to get to the root of what's being said and not the feeling that comes along with it. So there's so many ways to misinterpret and misunderstand with everyone's heightened tensions, sensitivities, anxiety, and number one, letting them know they are not alone. All of us are going through it, and we all have to find our ways to navigate through it, and we can learn it together and explore it together, experiment together, and it makes the students more comfortable. Those who are seeking professional attention say, hey, my counselor shared this with me, maybe this can help, and we welcome that as well.
That's tremendous. That's incredible. I really appreciate you sharing. Ellie, did you want to share something from a programmatic perspective?
Yeah, sure.
Please.
Yeah. So a lot of the focus in the work that I do is with the mentors, because I feel like then they bring it back to the mentees and the families. So we, as an agency, Klingberg has a very large outpatient clinic, does a lot of mental health work. So I make sure that the mentors are all have those resources, know where they can. If they need to give the family resources, they have those available. Another thing that we started to do, or kind of within our network at Governor's Prevention Partnership, we're working with doing an LGBTQ advisory. There's an advisory committee that's working together, doing a lot of work around that marginalized group. And so we've been able to bring that back to our program, focusing on mental health within that population as well. So there's been a lot of good stuff that we've done as a program. But like I said, most of it's putting it to the mentors, giving them what they need to help their mentees.
That's great. Thank you so much. As I shared earlier on a few of the slides, young people from the LGBTQ community have been disproportionately affected by a lot of what has happened with COVID, and it's very important for programs to be mindful of that. I haven't worked and run a program in a little over a decade or so, but I do know from my experiences working, that's a population that needs specific supports, particularly with what's going on. We know that the Asian American community has been facing a lot of discriminatory and violent acts. That's a population that's increasingly talking more about mental health and mental health challenges specific to their communities as well, recognizing the differences within the Asian American community as well. But it's important for us to recognize that, as Faith said earlier, we're all in this. Some of us who have, because of historical and contemporary reasons, come from historically oppressed and currently oppressed groups in many respects are getting it disproportionately, but we're in this together, and that's really what's important. I do think, just from a personal standpoint, that teachers will now be looked at least from the standpoint of many parents who've had to be home with their children, differently. And perhaps the funding that many of them needing in terms of increases in salaries and more supports for school systems, for those systems that can afford it, people will now look differently at it. We're going through a tremendous challenge in our country that requires us to really begin to rethink how we center young people. We can't just talk it, we have to be able to fund it as well. So thank you for that. And on that note, I'm going to turn it over to my good friend, Steve. We're kind of dominated here a little bit, my friend. But I'm hopeful that everyone has been able to enjoy the panel discussion so far. So Steve, take it over. Thank you, sir.
Oh no, this has been good. If you call that domination, then I don't know. I might have to get some redefinitions going. And speaking of definition, and thank you, to our panelists. I've been watching the chat, and there have been quite a few, virtual hand claps, as well as people who have been sharing resource, and that's what this digital underground railroad is supposed to be about. Thank you so much, Robin, for instance, who shared, hey, there's an innovation out there. And no, there's not a study, but, folks, this is not the time to be political or polite. The entire program is burning down around us. And we cannot be like that dog in the meme with the coffee cup as the whole house is burning, talking about this is fine. Let's use big words. Hell no. Like if you don't go grab a hose, a bucket, a cup, and try to put this fire out, that's the situation. And we have language, we have resource who are in this call together. And I just I'm teeing this up a little bit because, I'm really bought into this idea that mentoring cannot be about building the next middle class America. Damn it, no. Mentoring has to be about putting people into place who are going to be the power brokers and the folks that move this country in the direction that we hope to live to see. That's why I do it. And so my question is, and I want to start with Randy because one, I know she's going to hit us between the eyes with the 2x4, but secondly, because I know she has to go. So that's going to be the hottest, fastest hit you've ever had in your life. But I want to start with Randy around what is power? How do you define youth power? And not only how do you define it, how are you bringing it forward through your work? And then you can feel free to drop the mic and then, let us deal with whatever you leave. And don't be polite, please, Randy. Thank you. And Faith, you're next.
I think I believe youth power is giving youth the autonomy to lead and then utilizing us as a resource and support as needed. I think we underestimate young people and their ability to have the answers. I think we believe, and this ventures off into the ageism category, I think we believe that with age, we gain knowledge, and with age, we gain experience, and with age, we earn the right to lead and hold power. And I don't necessarily believe in any of those, right? I am a product of what it means to teach young people to be activists at a very young age. That was available to me and accessible to me in my high school experience. And the person you see at 45 is a direct result of that, right? And so I think instilling that and giving young people that autonomy to lead very early in life is cultivating future change makers. And I do believe that mentor-mentee relationships have the power to be more collaborative partnerships than adult-child relationships. Right. I think that as mentors, we transform into a system, a way of thinking and believing and reimagining what it means to let young people lead and guide us. And I know some programs are doing that, but I do know some programs are still stuck in the frame of mind of youth being the recipients of something, right? Like we're doing something and giving something to them rather than creating a partnership that allows us to learn from each other and grow together. And so, and as it relates to much of what we're seeing in this moment, I think the best resource we can be with young people is empowering them to lead, one, but two, encouraging them to continue to think critically about the world around them. I don't think it's about giving or delivering information as much as it's actually building and encouraging the skills to think critically about the world around them and how they can be agents for social change if that's what they choose to be. I think we need to encourage activism as a profession more. I think it's always been something people did on the side or did on the weekends, right? We don't imagine that that could be your life and that could be the life that you live, is to be a leader in that space. And I think this moment has brought us to opportunity to have that conversation differently and begin to cultivate that as a future way of young people being in this world. And so that's my short version of that. And I could say much, much more, but I don't want to take up all the space.
Yes.
But that is definitely, it really comes down to honoring young people as leaders and honoring them for the knowledge that they have and the power that they have to transform the world. There are some models in Connecticut that are doing this, but they tend to be not as popular as other models of doing this. And so I do really urge people to connect with organizations, Hearing Youth Voices, Citywide Youth Coalition, the National Conference on Community and Justice. Those are organizations that are giving young people the pathway, the skills, and the opportunities to lead in this social justice arena and conversation. And they are our future leaders and change makers.
That's so dope, Randy. And two things. One, can you put those organizations into the chat just so that folks have that list, please? And secondly, I just want to extend a point you made by going at it a little bit colloquially. So bear with me. I don't know how to clean this up. The reason Youth Power is not funded well is because nobody's paying you to fight them. Like nobody's going to fund you to be a revolutionary. And so the question is, how do we create safe spaces where that happens? And I'm just extending your point a little bit to say that, I think that's a part of the conversation as well. But I think it's also important for us to stay down that pathway. So I just wanted to love that point, those points that you made, and thank you for them. I knew you would do it, and you certainly did. And you brought receipts. Thank you. I appreciate you for that. Faith, I want to ask you the same question. Define youth power for us from your perspective. And then how are you ensuring that youth power is built through the work that you're doing? And before you jump in there, Faith, I want to say to the folks that are listening, please bring your questions. Randy's going to hang with us as long as she can. But certainly if you have a question for Randy, I would get it in there as soon as you can, like right now, so that she doesn't miss it. But for sure, we'd love your question and answer, because this is your chance to jump in with Q&A for our panelists. So Faith, if you don't mind, and Ellie, you're next, and Corinda, we'll go to you next after Ellie. Faith?
Well, I would like to say I completely echo, would photocopy, make banners of everything that Randy just talked about. And I'm going to crouch it and say, I think about reciprocity, right? We all do our program logic models. We know what we want to bring to the table for our students. We have all these great plans. We have curriculums and all of that great stuff. And I tend to take a step back and say, young person, whether it's my Keisha or my Daniel, I need for you to know this is what I can bring to the table, but I need reciprocity. What can you bring to the table to me? And every interaction that I have with a young person, I always emphasize the point that we're learning from each other, because we're experiencing the world in different ways. At their youth level, what's important for them may not be important to me, but I cannot discount that, because there are times, oh my God, my prom dress is the right color, or the shoes, or my hair, or what have you. And it's like, for some people, that's not important. But for that young person, It is important. So understanding that reciprocity is probably one of our greatest assets when it comes to working with youth. Um, I'm from the South, and my mother used to say, a child should stay in a child's place. And I tend to think, and as a mother to a 19-year-old and a 14-year-old now, a child's place is in this world right along with me. And it's important that I seek to understand that child's world from my adult perspective. So the one thing I would say is definitely understanding reciprocity and what that means, not just to us as service providers, program operators, but as individuals, as community members. I think that's critically important to move our youth forward. Now, when we talk about how do we in a sense, materialize youth voice into some form of leadership that can affect change, right? Our organization is really, really heavy on providing resources for post-secondary education. So rather that's a 2-year, 4-year graduate degree, I don't care. If you have that as a goal, we're going to provide the resources to make sure that that young person can reach that goal with minimal disruptions or distractions. Now, the work that I have in front of me, and I think this pandemic really lit a fire under myself, but also my entire board, is to say we have thousands of alumni that are employed, that are degreed, that have skill sets. Now, how do we bring those young people back to the community, provide the resources that they may need? Rather it's, Miss, I'm shy, I don't like public speaking. How can we get them some training about public speaking? I think Randy talked about advocacy, that there is a profession that's advocacy. In other words, it's called lobbying, right? So how do we teach our young people some of those skills so that our voices and our communities are reflected in those legislative halls? They're reflected in their local city halls. They're reflected in their hallways, in their high schools and middle schools. So my role and what our organization is trying to do is to not just provide an opportunity for them to get educated, but an opportunity for them to get educated and then come back and pay it forward in a way that they are coming in and taking up space, taking up roles in their communities where they are now the decision makers, the change agents, the ones who are pushing and making sure that the needs that were not addressed a generation ago, we're putting them on the table. And we're not letting you just get away with walking away and not addressing needs for decade after decade. So I think that's how power is not just generated, but realized in a sense that it's going to move us forward.
I appreciate that, Faith, and that's really helpful. I would term that the get-give program. Get yours and come back and give back. And certainly is received. And Ellie, what say you? How would you define power or youth power, and how does it show up in your work? How are you all ensuring that it shows up?
So Faith and Randy, it's tough to follow you guys, but I will say that I've been doing mentoring for a long time, and I always believed in it. And I thought it was always a powerful tool. I always, in my head thought these youth, I worked with juvenile justice population, DMST population, and I really, youth in the child welfare system, I always felt that a mentor was a real human in their lives. It wasn't another social worker or a probation officer or someone who was getting paid to do their job. It was just this volunteer person. So for me, and what I try to kind of bring to my program is this power of mentoring. And that's how we uplift our youth and we bring them to the next stage of their life and help them, whether it's educational attainment or, recidivism. A huge part of our program for many years was to reduce recidivism. And did we accomplish it? I don't know, but you know what we did? We brought volunteer people and humans into these kids' lives where they didn't have them. And I thought that was amazing work that we were doing. So if I think about what what I do on a daily basis to empower our youth, I think mentoring and providing quality mentors who are well-trained and come from similar backgrounds and can uplift our kids, I think that that's the work that I'm doing.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much, Ellie. And Corinda, what would you say about your definition of youth power, and certainly how it's exercised or how it's fostered in your work?
Yes, power is knowing your truth, owning your truth, and standing in your truth to propel your voice to power. But you first have to kind of identify your voice. So we spend time digging into personal brand and enhancing and developing their personal brand. Yeah, you may say you're shy, you're smart, you're on the honor roll, but what else creates the elements of who you are so that you can fully own that and understand that and realize the power that lies in that. We also share that leadership is not only elected in, it's through the choices that you make, it's through the words and the actions and the ways that you inspire others, and then allowing them to use and articulate their voice to empower others. So not to abuse the power, but to know that they can be positioned to use their voice to power. So first we identify and redefine their personal brand, then we identify and teach them how to amplify the voice, and then we try to provide a platform for them to be able to do so, whether it's in sessions with the students, whether it's through advocacy, through legislation that's being passed now. We're trying to get some of them on board with the Crown Act and speaking out about tobacco, and to the staff and their peers and their families as well. Leadership doesn't happen overnight, but you have to practice it to build comfort, and it's uncomfortable to grow and to stretch. And just like any muscle, you have to use it to strengthen it. And that's where we really try to focus to say, be intentional. We're building leaders here. And was that the best choice to make right now? Or was that the best thing to say? And then you notice them self-checking each other or self-correcting or self-checking the staff at times too. Miss, that wasn't nice. So it's like, you're right. Thank you for leading in that moment. So we don't really wait for the long-term effects of that leadership. We want them to start noticing and try to implement it today with the choices that they're making as they interact.
I appreciate that. No, thank you so much, Corinda. And there was a question that came through from Gail that we'd like to pose to the three of you. And that is, how do mentors address supporting mentees in environments where the mentee has very little family involvement or support because the parents are out of work or they're out of the house because they have to work? So it's an age-old question, how do we support mentees in environments where there's little family involvement because of whatever's happening in the home?
I think if we had the answer, we'd all be superstars, right? Like, I think we just do it every day. We work hard to give our mentors what they need to understand where the family's coming from. There are times that we've had to talk mentors, and give them resources or provide training opportunities for them. And I know I go back to this training opportunity for our mentors, but I think that's some of it. That's a huge piece of program, like what we're doing with our program, because our families are lacking and they don't have resources, or they may not have all these things. So I wish there was an easy answer to that. If anybody else has the answer, that would be great. I'd love it for my program, but I think we're just trying to do the best we can to address all the needs of our families.
I don't have an answer, Ellie, but I do have a process. And one of that process really speaks to how to prioritize certain things, right? Any young person, any human being, we can probably have like 20 or 30 things going on at one time. Some of you are probably like looking at your phones, and even right now, right? And I think it's critically important to, when our mentors are working with the mentees, that the mentors need to understand that young people, like, the world is literally crumbling around them if their phone isn't charged, right? So I think it's important for us to make sure that We provide the mentors with the skill set where they are able to help their mentee to prioritize what needs to be addressed first. What is the most pressing issue for you or your family? And then as you start to get a better understanding of what the priorities are, it's quite important, if you will, and I would recommend that the mentor shares with the mentee, I may not have all of the answers today, but working with us and continuing to meet, this is what we're going to do. We're going to prioritize your needs, and we're going to try to find as many resources as we can to make sure that you and the needs of your family truly get met. But definitely don't make any false promises that we cannot keep, but understanding that things have to be kind of taken apart and put back together sometimes. And I think being able to help the mentee and the mentor prioritize where they want to start will definitely help that student. Not that it's going to resolve every single one of their issues, but at least that mentee knowing that there's someone that cares, there's someone who's going to help me and my family get the resources that we need to be better. I think it is really key in when you're working with our youth. So,
and if your
thank you for that, Faith. Go ahead, Corinda.
So, say if your programming can allow to reach out to the families in a safe and appropriate way, because, like she said, giving those resources can be some simple fixes. Like they may be overly stressed because they don't have food. You may not provide food, but can give them a resource that can get them the food, can get them access to transportation or whatever. So really digging down to what that root is. But the other benefit of the pandemic is allowed for more virtual connection and interaction. So through texts, through motivational videos or inspirational other things that can be sent digitally can still help to address the need of the mentor more quickly, more dynamically, and to be able to share it and be a little bit more transparent with the families as needed, and still just trying to provide a village support that the team could use.
Thank you. Thank the three. I appreciate your responses. That's a really tough question you asked, Gail. We know that with everyone being in the house, let's just go to just the humanity of this, that people have learned they don't really like each other right now. Like, let's just be real. Some people don't like themselves, and there are people that just don't like the folks they live with. They didn't realize it till they got locked in the house for a couple weeks with a couple cans of whatever's left and realize, I don't like this and I don't like y'all, and somebody got to go, something's got to change. And that's all of us on the phone. Now, if you go to a family that's not as resourced, and what we know, and I say that tongue in cheek, but what we know has happened across the country is incidences of child abuse have skyrocketed, and particularly amongst immigrant communities and amongst communities of color, and in places where they can afford the lease, places where families are living, multiple families are living in the same dwelling. We've seen an explosion of all kinds of inappropriate stuff. Domestic violence has also skyrocketed, and young people are living in these scenarios. So the question you ask, Gail, is a very big one. I think that mentoring, where I land on it, is the connection between that mentor and mentee and being sensitized to the scenario, that mentor is walking in, as I think all of our guests have said, they're walking in with into the relationship with tools and techniques that help them recognize when something is really awry and when it's just annoying, and then being able to operate accordingly. And certainly, not that we're in the space of, if it's in the space of awry, recognizing that they may be actual first responders in that scenario, who must sort of report that something crazy is happening and this young person needs help. And hopefully the relationship is strong enough and trusting enough that the young person would say so. I know that we are just about on time, if not right at time. And so want to wrap by saying thank you to our colleagues, to Corinda Richardson, to Ellie Quifalo, to Faith Villegas. Thank you so very much. I'm going to turn back over to Brian to close us out, bring us home. You got that pressure, brother. You can handle it.
Apparently so, because my face is like, I'm supposed to be closing out. Well, listen, I just want to tell everybody, this has been a pleasure. Steve and I have known each other, oh gosh, probably close to maybe 15 years, I think, Steve, and got to know Aristide doing some training when I was working for Mentor. Steve was both worked for Mentor as well. So this has been a tremendous opportunity for me to work with a friend and colleague, but also to reconnect with Corinda and get a chance to meet Faith and Ellie, and to get a chance to work with Joe as well. You have a wonderful team. You have a wonderful group of people in the state of Connecticut, and I'm hoping that although these times are very challenging, you will both use the resources that the partnership has put together on their website, but also use the human resources and tapping into each other's. Because I think that we are the leaders that we've been looking for, something that I learned many years ago, and I think is very helpful. So I don't want to say any more than that, but I appreciate you all, and good luck throughout the rest of your conference. And continue to keep the faith and continue to push along. There will be brighter days. Thank you so much, everyone. Aristide, Joe.
Well, thank you. I am just so elated to be part of this powerful keynote speaking presentation. And I want to thank, of course, Steve, Brian, Faith, Randy, Faith, and Corinda. I've had an opportunity to work with all of you. This was very powerful. And I want to thank you all, and those of you that stood through this presentation, thank you all for attending. I want to give a shout out to some of the affiliates from around the country that have joined us at a national level. Good to see you all on the call. And with that, I think we're going to go ahead and end this end of our presentation, but we have a lot more coming up. So we look forward to seeing you all throughout the day at the 2021 Connecticut Mentoring Summit. Thanks again.